acutely aware of a constant feeling that I was a fraud, didn't deserve to be there, I was going to be found out. It was really normal to say, oh, you're quite nice, you're not like a normal black person, or you're not like all the other black people. So constant reminders, Dominic, of that difference, of standing out. And then at the mindset level, it is simply the practice of noticing when you're thinking, I'm the only one in the room, or when you're thinking or feeling like the victim, noticing that you're doing that, and then redirecting your brain to thinking, I'm not the only one, I'm the first.
My guest for this episode is Caroline Flanagan. Caroline is a career progressions coach, keynote speaker, and the host of the Caroline Flanagan Podcast and the Legal Imposters Podcast. She's also the author of Be the First, People of Colour, Imposter Syndrome, and the Struggle to Succeed in a White World, which was a Business Book Awards finalist in 2022. An ex-city lawyer, Caroline works with international law firms, banks and global organisations to increase the number of people of colour in leadership. Her mission is to help you break through bias, break down barriers and be the change you want to see in the world. I first saw Caroline speak a few months ago and I was blown away by her energy and story, so I had to have her on the podcast to dig a little deeper and find out more about her amazing journey. If you enjoy what you hear, please leave a review, like, comment and subscribe. It would mean the world to me and will help this podcast reach as many people as possible. You don't want to miss this. Enjoy. Caroline, welcome to the show. My first question for you, in life, what's the most important thing you've ever had to pitch for?
Hello, Dominic. It's great to be here. Keep it a gentle question to get us started. What's the most important thing I've ever had to pitch for?
Yeah.
Well, the fact that you use the word important has sent my brain to thinking about my family, to like what's most important to me. Now, obviously, there's not an official pitch to your family, but I think about the most important moments, like meeting my husband, think about my children and things I've done on behalf of them. I can't identify a single most important moment, but it would be connected to the things that are most important to me, which are my family. Sounds like I've slightly avoided the question, but if I think of something specific, I'll come back to it.
Yeah, not at all. I think it's really interesting. We're continually pitching things into existence, creating that vision for what we want our life to be like. And that's not necessarily a singular moment, as you say. It's a series of little choices that lead, hopefully, in the direction of a really big outcome. If you think about your work life, we're going to dig into some of the journey as we go through the podcast, but what are some of the big kind of moments of pitching for something different that have stood out for you in your career?
Yeah, certainly. So my first full proper grown-up job, so becoming a lawyer, so pitching, I guess, an interview for those roles were just massive. And the reason for that, and it also ties into your first question, is because, it's about what's important in that moment and why. So for me, the pitching for a job in a law firm, which would also include them sponsoring me through law school and paying for that, which I didn't have the funds to do otherwise. It meant guaranteed work and income and security and things that were really, really important to me at a time when, because of my background and my childhood, that was of the hugest significance, having security, knowing I could pay the rent, all of that, a product of my childhood made, the outcome of certain interviews very, very important for me.
When you think of those kind of interview moments and those kind of pitch opportunities through your career, are there any that you think, that was one that got away? I'd love to have known what might have happened if I'd have gone down that path instead.
So and this still surprises me, I was quite successful pitching for those roles.
It doesn't surprise
So
me in the slightest.
I think partly that is meeting lots of people who are really struggling to win training contracts or get their sponsorship. And I remember I applied to 5 law firms and I got 5 offers. So that was amazing. And I think what that created was, of course, a sort of confidence, a pitching confidence that I then took into other interviews. I also enjoy engaging with people. So I started to think of it as my superpower. When you talk about, okay, the thing, okay, that got away from you, actually what sprung to mind is, I do a lot of consult calls with people who are interested in working with me. And sometimes I'm on a call and it's kind of a pitch, even though I'm there to learn about them and figure out if I'm the right person for them to work with. Sometimes it's just so clear and it's a no-brainer and they're like, I want to work with you. This is really obvious. Everything all fits. But then there's just a couple, there've been a few where they've gone away. They've said they'd like to work with me, but then it hasn't like materialized or it hasn't happened. And I have had a couple where I've thought, well, what was it? Because so many things lined up during the pitch, if I'm using that to describe the consultation, right? So many things lined up. Like, what was the thing that was missing? And it's a little bit part of the growth of my business right now, and part of just my next level of development is, okay, how can I fine tune that? Like, what was it that was missing? And how do I make the next one better? And how do I catch it the next time?
Interesting. It is a process of kind of continual development, isn't it, and refinement in all areas of our lives, that we have to be prepared to look at what went well, but also confront the things that maybe didn't kind of go in the way that we expected them to, and learn from those things. So you're a very successful author, speaker, coach, but that wasn't the path that you set out on. You've talked about, law school and becoming a lawyer. What's your story? Can you take us back to the beginning as a kid? Like what did you want to be?
Yeah, as a kid, it's weird. I have the memory of being like really, really young and wanting to be a hairdresser with like dolls, at the age of 5 or something, right? And then as I later on at primary school, I don't think I was thinking ahead, oh, I want to be this, but I was definitely ambitious, right? I knew that. I knew I cared about achievement. I liked to get top grades and win awards and all of that. So I was driven without necessarily know where I was driving towards. Then during my teenage years, which were fairly turbulent, so we had, there was a certain point where I was living on my own with my brother. We were sort of 15, 16, 17, and under the threat of being evicted from the council flat we were living in. It was also a time, so it was London in the 1980s. So it was very challenging being basically being a Black person in London in the 1980s, and especially for my brother. So it was very, very normal for, if you were a young Black male, you would just be stopped by police all the time. And I remember how powerless that made him feel and us feel, and how vulnerable. And I think that's where the first seeds of, like, if I was a lawyer and if I knew the law and we knew our rights and this couldn't happen, like that's where the first seeds, I think, were sown. And then it was a much more, I think, thoughtful, so that would have been an emotional drive into the law. Then it became more of a thoughtful, okay, what am I figuring out what I enjoy at school, what do I do at university? And I didn't do law, actually. I didn't do a law degree. I did a history degree, but knowing very well that I could convert that to, I could go to law school and then get a job as a lawyer. And the reason why I tell you all of this is because that very much, it was so, once I got a sense that being a lawyer was going to tick all of the boxes of what I wanted in my career, I became obsessive about that being my path and wanting to do it. So that's how I ended up being a lawyer, and I was a finance lawyer in the city, and I did that for just over 9 years.
Interesting. So if you think about that, the young version of you at school, as you say, London 1980s is quite a difficult kind of cultural time.
Mm.
Were there moments where you felt different? Because you talk a lot about, you know, imposter syndrome and the
Yeah.
idea of, you know, standing out. Um, but I am imagining that in those early years that was not standing out in necessarily a good, empowering way. It was more
Yeah.
challenging than that. When was the kind of first realization that you had that you weren't the same as the other people in the school?
Yeah. So I can almost tell you the exact day when I had that first realization, because it was very circumstantial. So at the age of, so I had, it was just before my 6th birthday, I was sent to an all-white boarding school. And even how that happened, there's a lot of sort of confusion and unspoken and like stuff I don't really know about how that happened. Like one minute I was at home, like sneaking down in the middle of the night with my brother to make white bread and white sugar sandwiches. I tell my
Nice.
kids about this and they just like can't believe it. So strict about their diet. But like that was one of my earliest memories. And then the next minute I'm in this school and I'm looking around me and nobody, like everybody is white. So at the age of 5, just turning 6, you know, I don't have lots of memories of before then. So it wouldn't be a stretch to say that some of my earliest memories actually are of being the one that stood out, of being different. And as you said, culturally, it was a very it was a complicated time, and therefore there was a lot of overt racism, and it was just the way, you know, the way people talk. My teachers called me Lady of the Jungle, and white friends, and I did make friends and I did thrive in that school, but it was really normal to say, oh, you're quite nice, you're not like a normal black person, or you're not like all the other black people. So constant reminders, Dominic, of that difference, of standing out. And that continued. So the school I then went to as a secondary school, I was also like the only black person when I first joined that school. So that was my whole journey, actually, to the point where by the time I was then a lawyer in the city, where I was basically the only black person in the room, or most of the time, I think I remember there being 2 other black lawyers that joined as part of my graduate intake. There were about 60 of us in total, of which, so 3 of us were black, and the other 2 left on qualification. So
Wow.
that was again the norm for me, and that's what I'll say, is it was very much a norm for me. And one of the things that, when we get on to talking about my coaching and who I work with, has been an experience I've taken the value from and has really have used to serve me, and I'm now using to serve other people and do what I think I'm like destined to do in this world. Absolutely. Which is really fun.
I mean, from a very, you know, privileged position as a white middle class male, it's almost impossible to put myself in your shoes. But if I try, I imagine that you must have had to have a huge degree of inner strength in those moments, in order, you know, to keep going, to achieve the amazing things that you've achieved. What can you identify where that sort of source of strength and resilience comes from?
Yeah, I actually have been asked this question recently, and I'm still not sure what the answer is, but my best guess right now is it comes from 2 places. I suspect it comes a little bit from my mum, which is, I don't have a very close relationship with my mum. It's been a very tricky one, and I don't spend time with her. And I don't have that many really positive memories of her and growing up. But what I do remember and know about her, she's very sort of strong-willed person, and is someone who wouldn't take no for an answer, for example. If you'd asked me possibly even 5 years ago, definitely 10 years ago or longer ago, whether I thought I'd got any of my inner strength from my mum, I would have said, no, I don't think so. But I think as I get older, I'm recognizing more and more there's a sort of bloody mindedness to me that is about, like, you know, not wanting, like, I remember at such an early age being, especially given the context as we talked about already, of when I grew up, there being this constant, it's because you're black. Whenever there was an obstacle or a roadblock or something didn't go someone's way, it's because you're black. Places like that don't want people like us. That's something that actually my mum had said to me. And there was lots of evidence, Dominic, for why that was true. I mean, really, really very clear, to the signs that would be put in shop windows, making it very clear. So it's not that that wasn't true, but I remember like almost physically reacting against that, like repelling that as an explanation, as a way of thinking about the world, because it just didn't. I just thought, and I remember saying, that doesn't work for me. And that was this sort of, and not necessarily externally to other people, but I remember how forcefully I believed in my head that believing or thinking it's because I'm black and that's the reason why I can't succeed or achieve what I want to achieve would not serve me, would not work for me, and therefore I'm not interested in, it's not that I'm pretending it wasn't true, but I'm not interested in going there and making my decisions from that place.
Based from that place.
Yeah, right. So yes, getting back to your question, in part from my mum, who was always very, would have like not taken no for an answer. But I think from a survival point of view, as I said, at the age of 5, 6, being in an environment where I need to survive, like resilience also comes from that, right? Like being challenged, being put through things, and you grow at resilience and you grow an inner world. I read profusely, and I remember discovering self-help books at the beginning of, like, when they were first coming out, and reading about the power of your thoughts and how that can change how you show up, change how you experience the world, and just finding that amazing, which is why it's so beautiful that years later, after fulfilling my ambitions of becoming a lawyer, I ended up, well, I say coaching found me. I felt like it was like there waiting in the wings for me to really focus all of my energy actually on allowing or showing other people that can be true for them too, that their inner world, they can be bigger than their physical circumstances by doing this internal work.
You obviously had a kind of academic talent as well. I mean, you, if I have done my research, you studied history at Cambridge, so it can't have been easy to get into Cambridge to study a subject like that. Do you lead in terms of your kind of thought process with your head or your heart, or is it a kind of alignment of both?
First of all, I never thought about myself as academic. I never have, which is so interesting. I definitely always thought everybody else was smarter than me. And going to Cambridge was an interesting how that all started with my history teacher actually saying, I remember he picked up an essay I'd written and he's like, we need to have a talk about your future. And in that conversation, he's like, I think like you should be applying to Oxbridge with this kind of work, what you're producing. And I remember saying, no, I remember saying, I'm not doing that. That's like, because to me, that was such a, like, why would I set myself up for that level of failure? Why would I go for something like that? It was just so beyond, like, my family, none of them, like, they weren't going to university. My dad was a bus driver. My mum was missing in action. Like, we weren't from a family that went to university, let alone aiming to shooting for that caliber of university. So my initial response had been no. And actually, with all credit to him, it was amazing that he was able to, he sort of tried to get me to justify not going for such a big goal. And that resulted in me being brave enough to try. And the reason why I tell you that story is because I've never seen myself as someone who is very brain-led or academic in that way. Having said that, I love to use my brain. Yeah. So I think the answer is a bit of both. Yeah. I'm definitely heartfelt and heart-driven, but I love to use my brain. I love to think. I love to be challenged in how I think. So I like the thought of myself, and I think there's enough evidence in the choices I made that actually it's a little bit of both.
Yeah. It's amazing the power of those kind of, teacher mentor relationships. I have a very
Mm.
sort of similar story. My drama teacher sort of said to me, you should be going to drama school, you should become an actor. And at that point, I was down that kind of academic route, and I was thinking lawyer, actually. It's all an act, isn't it, as far as
Wow.
I'm concerned? And she said, you should go and try this. And then I had a situation where I had applied to, the top drama schools and got rejected. The 4 out of the 5, the first 4 that I auditioned for, all said no. So I went to the final audition with that kind of pressure on my shoulders. And I'm so glad that I, listened to that piece of advice. It wasn't easy to take on board. It certainly kicked my life off in a very different direction than it would have gone down had I just continued with my studies and gone to university. But having someone else's trust and allowing other people to see what you're capable of is so powerful. And I think you're a coach, you understand that that's kind of your job, is to see the best in other people and help them kind of bring it out. Hey, you worked, having studied at Cambridge. You worked as a lawyer, and you talked a little bit at the beginning of the podcast about that pitching process and of going to those 5 law firms. And unlike me, you got offers from all of them. How did you make the choice about where to go? Like, you're here, you are suddenly with this opportunity. How did you decide who you were going to work for and who you're going to do that initial training contract with?
Oh, between the 5?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was relatively easy. I'm thinking back now, and to what I remember. They all met my sort of criteria, ticks the boxes
Yeah.
that I was looking for in a law firm. I think it was a process of elimination in part, but also I went for the firm that I thought was it was a combination of the most prestigious, and I'd had the best interview experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Meaning, the sense I had so for example, I'd interviewed at Alan Overy, which is where I chose to go.
Yeah.
But I also interviewed at Clifford Chance, and I'd done a work placement there actually. And it was more a sense in the interview and how the warmth I'd felt from the interviewers that did it. I still remember who interviewed me at Alan Overy.
So as a young female lawyer, never mind a young female lawyer of color, there's a lot of kind of barriers to standing out and growing a personal brand. How did you start to create that visibility for yourself in that early part of your law career?
Yeah, the answer to that, Dominic, is I'm not sure that I did actually. In the early part of my law career, I had from a fairly young age understood that branding is important. And I think that's a product of having been judged very clearly and often very overtly by the colour of my skin and being underestimated. So that's something I had a lot of assumptions made about, that you were either stupid or didn't know better, or things like that, you were less than. So I knew, and I grew up in a world where there were negative assumptions made based on my appearance or on how I spoke. And I was very mindful of showing up and not, so stereotypes of, I don't know, Black people always being late or always being poorly turned out, and all of that definitely started to inform how I presented myself and how I showed up, so absolutely, in a work environment. So that for sure would have been present from the early years of my career. But I wasn't aware of, I would never have sort of thought as intentionally as I do now, and as I teach my clients to do, about personal branding. How are people perceiving you? Like, find out how people are perceiving you. How can you find that out? And is that and is that how you want to be perceived? So one of the really common problems I see is you'll have a very accomplished, very talented Black lawyer, a certain level, maybe a mid-level associate, for example, in a law firm, and how they believe themselves to be is completely different to the feedback that they'll be receiving. For example, they might be being told, oh, you're actually quite aggressive, you're quite intransigent, you're quite this, X, Y, and Z. And meanwhile, the lawyer's thinking, I'm not those things at all. My friends would never say that about me. Or it could be the perception that they are really shy and quiet and not very good at showing their opinions in front of, in a meeting or in a crowd. Whereas at home, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm the one that no one will, I never shut up at home, or when I'm with friends, this is not me at all. So that piece there, I'd say I wasn't aware of that at a very young, like very early on in my career, but I was increasingly aware of it later on. And it's one of the things that I see is keeping my clients stuck. And I'm very intentional about helping them to work on, to show the importance of actually finding out, like, how am I being perceived? How do I want to be perceived? And closing that gap.
You work with people now around this idea of imposter syndrome, and I think the more successful people I speak to, the more it becomes apparent to me that almost everyone has had that experience at some point in their lives. When you were in that kind of early part of your law career, what was there a level of imposter syndrome there, and if so, how did you deal with it?
Yeah, 100%. It was there. It was there I feel like it was there my whole life. And how did I deal with it as a lawyer or as a 6-year-old, all the way through and throughout my whole law career? I was just aware of it. Okay. Yeah, I didn't know it was imposter syndrome at the time. I was acutely aware of a constant feeling that I was a fraud, didn't deserve to be there, I was going to be found out. Like that very sort of, it can feel quite sinister, but like very low level but ongoing narrative behind everything. Really, really aware of it. And what I will say is I succeeded in spite of it, actually, as a lawyer. What I've learned, I only discovered it was actually imposter syndrome. It was a name, right, for those very specific thoughts and feelings, and it was imposter syndrome. When I discovered that, and literally reading in a book, you feel like a fraud. You think your success is down to luck. You think any minute now you're going to be found out. I could not believe it was literally those exact words that had been my inner dialogue or monologue rather. My whole career. So knowing in that moment that it was an actual thing and had a name was a really pivotal moment for me. And that's when began the journey of like wanting to understand it. Why do I have it? What can I do about it? And learning. And the more I then started to talk about my experience of it and how I had succeeded, people, it really resonated with people, and they were wanting to learn, and wanting to learn more about how I had navigated a career while having that. And that's so to your question, I definitely had the feelings and experience of it while I was working as a lawyer, but only after leaving it and being curious and interested enough to want to figure out, like, why is this different to normal just doubting yourself and just telling you, and why is it not fixed by just telling yourself you're good enough, look how well you've done? Like my almost intellectual curiosity around it and determination. It was around actually when I wrote my first book, and I'd written the book, and the idea of publishing this book was the hardest thing, like the most challenging experience ever. I felt so vulnerable. And it triggered all of this imposter syndrome. That was the moment I'm like, I'm going to figure this out. Because if I don't figure this out, then I will just keep hitting this ceiling, keep hitting these blocks. And I want to figure it out. So that was the turning point, I'd say, when I wrote the first book that switched me into, how have I been solving for this? What has worked? Why do all the other things not work? And how can I help other people to figure this out too?
So you left what is, a very from an outside perspective at least, a very, lucrative and impressive career in law to become a coach and start helping other people. Where did that idea come from? Was that linked to your first book, or did you, just make a leap and see what happened afterwards?
The second one.
Yeah, it's normally the story.
Honestly, I'm like in awe of my younger self for just like the courage. So yes, it was definitely a very prestigious, very lucrative career. I'm saying that really intentionally because it's part of what drew me to that career. The security it offered, the credibility it brought, all of that extremely important to me.
Yeah.
So consider that I built also then this identity for 9 years as someone who is, I walk into a room, I say I'm a lawyer, and people will maybe make certain assumptions about me that tend to be in my favor. I mean, not always if you say you're a lawyer, but right, from a credibility point of view. So to walk away from a career I've worked incredibly hard to build and had been, a journey to get there, and to walk away from really a life, when you're a lawyer, you've got a pretty good chance of being employed for the rest of your life and having guaranteed work and earning reasonable money.
Yeah.
So to walk away from all of that was not a small deal, right? I always tease my lawyer clients and say how, because I remember this myself when I was in private practice, how you'll have a series of really tricky deals, right, Dominic, and it'd be exhausting. You do some all-nighters and you'd be like, why am I doing this? Why am I slave to this job? I should leave and do something else. And I would say it would come up once a year, this being like, I'm going to leave and do something else. And then you have a good night's sleep and you're like, it's fine, I'm staying here. And all the other things are too good for me to walk away. So I think that is a really normal experience to have. What changed for me were two things. One, so I had my first son, I went back to work. Then I had my second son and I went back to work. And the circumstances of that were such that I felt very let down by the approach of certain partners that I was working with towards, because this was a very different time. So I'd taken a big pay cut just so that I could work 5 days a week, but leave the office in time to collect my kid. And there were all this. So already it was quite a challenging, not an ideal setup from the perspective of how much I was given and what I was being remunerated for. And that sense of having that 20% pay cut really made me feel undervalued. But that's not the kind of thing on its own that would have been enough to make me leave. As I've already explained, I'm quite bloody minded and I was always felt, right, I can go all the way in this profession. If that's what I'm determined to do, I will do it.
Yeah.
But the second thing, what I did do is it created a sort of fertile ground, right, for considering something else. But what really, really made the difference was, I don't know what triggered this thought, but I asked myself the question, perhaps it was at one of those times when you think, oh, should I do this the rest of my life or should I leave? I asked myself the question, okay, Caroline, if at the end of your life, on your deathbed, all you have ever been, all you've ever done is being a lawyer, how would you feel? I don't know what made me ask myself that question. I think it's the natural born coach in me that probably made me ask myself that question. But the answer was just so clear. And the answer was, I will be so disappointed in myself.
Interesting.
Now, I want to be clear. I'm married to a lawyer. I work with lawyers, right? I coach lawyers. I have so much admiration and respect for lawyers, and I'm in awe of them in so many ways. And I respected myself so much as a lawyer. It wasn't about that. It was about knowing there was so much more that I had to give that there wasn't an outlet for in a corporate legal job. And so I didn't know what I was going to do, but I just decided I need to leave now because otherwise I'll just keep going and I'll stay on this track and I will achieve the goal, whatever goal I set myself, but there'll be this whole unanswered part of me that I want to bet on now, actually.
That's amazing. It's such a scary thing to do, but I think when you kind of give yourself permission to make that leap, if you've done it in a considered way, if you've asked yourself those questions, then my experience is normally, you jump and someone catches you, and something interesting starts to come. So your first book was called Baby Proof Your Career, and you've got 4 boys, which kind of just like blows my mind. What I've got 1 daughter, and that's enough. But what did becoming a mum teach you about yourself that you didn't know before?
Oh, that I could be a good one. I never thought I could be a good mum. I was never one of those people who was like, oh, I can't wait to have children. I definitely want to have a family. I'd had a very tricky upbringing, so I didn't have confidence in that area. At the same time, I wasn't anti it. I thought it was a nice thought for the future, but it was definitely like imagining a different person, a different version of me. What did it teach me about myself that I didn't know? There are lots of different ways that I could answer this question. I think the best answer, and the one that's front of mind right now in terms of teaching me about myself, is when I was pregnant with my eldest son, Dylan. When I fell pregnant with him, that was earlier than planned. So I was engaged to be married, had not planned to have babies that soon. I'd also started, I just had this massive job change that was like in a massive pay rise and all of this. And I was like, career. So when I discovered I was pregnant, and Dylan knows this, right? He knows the story of him deciding to come a year earlier, at least a year earlier than I would have even contemplated. And he knows I was absolutely just mortified. And I was mortified because I had sworn I would never have a child unless I was already married. I'd sworn I would only have, my whole life had been about me creating a life I could controlling everything. Yeah. I'd had such a childhood that was out of control in so many ways, and being evicted from our council flat, just me and my brother, is a really good example of that everything, I controlled everything, and everything happened when I planned it, and my career went in the way I planned it, and all of this stuff. So even before I'm getting to the parenting bit, Dominic, just the discovering that I'm going to be a mum and I was pregnant was so shocking to me. And it was like that something so massive and that would have such an impact on my life could happen beyond my control. It was a journey to get my head around that. And the reason why I'm offering this as the answer to your question is because what I learned is that something can happen that's out of my control and I can rise to the occasion.
Yeah.
Right. And that thing can be so beautiful and so amazing and take my life in a direction I could never have even perceived or imagined. I've learned that both life can offer you those moments and those challenges, and whatever life offers me. In that case, it was such a beautiful thing, but whatever, I think that's the thing, actually. Whatever life offers you, it can offer me something really beautiful, and I'm also able to enjoy and thrive and rise to that occasion. And I think prior to that, the way I thought about myself was someone I rise to the occasion when things go wrong.
Right.
So that really changed how I thought about myself, I think, in the world. Yeah.
You with 4 boys in the house, you must have to kind of juggle a lot, just in terms of looking after their schedules and making sure everyone's in the right place at the right time. And that has to be a superpower in terms of running a business and being a speaker and making time to write books. How do you create time for yourself? Because it's something that it's always a work in progress for me, and I'm always curious about how other people do it.
Yeah. So I will say that I allow things to be imperfect. That's really, really a key to being able to parent and do all of those things. I know there are lots of people who, if they're listening to this, who know me, will be like, no, she does not allow things to be imperfect. So I'm going to say that that's partly true, but definitely with parenting, I allow it to be imperfect. How do I find time to myself? So I'm obsessed with morning routines, is the answer. So I get up early. And so right now, so my alarm goes off at 5:40 in the morning. And so typically I make sure it's an hour before anything, an hour before the world, my family, my boys require anything of me. That's honestly my secret. And what that allows me to do is have time to think. I move my body, I am connect with myself. And it doesn't sound like a big deal if you're not someone who has a morning routine or gets up early. If you just fall into the day and you start it, then that just probably sounds like a reason to have less sleep. But to do that consistently and always have time where you are, I mean, you're literally just checking in on yourself and able to, because I think your body speaks all the time, tells you what it needs, and you know what you need. It's just that we're so busy we don't hear it and we don't listen. So for me, that is absolutely key. I do a lot of yoga in the morning, and I read things that expand my thinking, not things like news that make me think about the challenges of the world. So morning routines is key. And I think from that, starting the day well, everything else flows. And then the beauty is it then resets the next day, right? So that's definitely key.
I love that. I think allowing things to be messy within that as well is really important for me. So I have a kind of perfectionist tendency, and I can be a little bit fatalistic. So if I miss a day of my kind of quiet time or meditation time, I will be, oh God, it's all over. I've lost the streak where my app now has reset to 0. It's a disaster. But actually to get back on the horse the following morning and to make that time for yourself, I know for me that if I miss a day of that routine, or for example if I'm traveling and it gets squeezed, then I can really feel the repercussions of that. And I have to be very active in kind of making sure that I find other moments through the day to be present, to be grounded, and to try and stop, the world taking over.
Yeah.
I noticed in your biography that you're magic circle trained, and so I'm just wondering, are there any kind of special tips or tricks that you use on the kids? I'm reading Harry Potter to Nell at the moment, and I've been thinking, it'd be useful to stupefy. Just sort of leave it there.
That's so good. So that's brilliant. I've never been asked about the magic circle thing, Dominic, and I realise, so because I talk to lawyers and work with lawyers so much, the reason why that's in there is because Alan Overy is part of a magic circle of law firms.
Right, okay.
That tend to be kind of, it's a positioning piece, right?
Okay.
So I'm not just a lawyer, I'm a magic circle trained lawyer. So that tends to carry a lot of weight with my clients and with my audience. I work with a lot of magic circle firms, and it's because the culture in those law firms is particularly particularly challenging at times and demanding. So what that shows is I know exactly how to coach them. I know exactly the challenges that they are facing at the highest level. But I do like the idea and the thought that there'll be people looking at my bio and seeing I'm magic circle trained and thinking I have the tricks up my sleeve.
I think magic wand might be the way forward. How do you see a kind of culture changing with those sorts of firms of more recognition of mental health and well-being, and that people's ability not to burn out in those situations? Because everyone in my group of friends who works in those environments has had, especially in the early days, it seems it's like you have to pay your dues, and as you rise up the ladder, then life becomes easier because you paid into that bank account. But do you see a sort of change and shift in culture at the moment?
So there's two things there for me. There's on the well-being and mental health side, and then there's on the diversity side of culture shifting. So to the first one, there's certainly more awareness around it. There's more training and speakers' willingness to get people in to educate around that, and that already shows a culture change, because I don't remember there being anything about well-being and mental health being talked about at all when I was a junior lawyer. So that is true. What I will say is there's still so much, there's definitely progress, but still so much like more that can be done there, because in, once you get inside some of the organizations that I think about, the clients that come to me, some of them are really struggling because it still very much is that old perception of, you sacrifice everything
Yeah.
in the early years, and that's just the way it is. And there's so many other people lining up to take your job if you don't. So yes, there's the whole well-being thing, but this is the real world of law.
Yeah.
So there's still a lot of progress to be made. One thing I will say, I had lunch with a client yesterday, and she's actually a former client, and what she was observing, she's now at a very senior level in her career, and she was observing how the junior lawyers are actually not standing for that whole narrative around pay your dues and slave away. They're just not doing it. And she had a very junior lawyer respond to her request that they do some work with the words, well, I don't really feel like energetically, I'm not really in the right space right now to do that work. I don't really have the energy, but I'll get back to you when I have, right?
Wow.
Which, like, to hear that as, if you're as like a partner or a director level, to hear that from a junior, I'm sure in lots of other industries, you'd just be like, it's gobsmacking, because it's not how you... Yeah, right. So in that way, it is kind of changing, Dominic, right? So in terms of those who are coming into certainly the legal industry, the profession, some of them actually, they won't stand for that approach. So it's changing almost from the grassroots as well. And I'd probably mirror that actually from the diversity, in terms of ethnic diversity or gender diversity is a little bit further along, but things are getting better culturally. But there's still a very, very long way to go.
Absolutely.
So,
Your latest book is called Be the First. Where did that idea come from?
Just be the first. Just hearing those words make me very, very excited about the message of that and what it means. Yeah. So where it came from, Dominic, is so those exact words, the concept and the idea had been germinating for a long time, but to sort of be able to capture it in those three really powerful words came from a night where I was at a charity fundraising event in one of the big iconic hotels in London, and I'd gone there with a friend of mine who's also Black, and we were the only Black people in the room. I mean, that's not slightly true, because there were other Black people in the room, but they were the ones serving like the champagne or serving the food. But as guests dressed up and invited to attend this gala. And this friend of mine at a certain point turned to me like really frustrated, really angry, and just said, why is it always like this? Why are we always the only ones in the room? And I remember when she said that, I thought, like, that's so interesting. It never occurred to me to think that when I walked in here and I saw this sort of sea of white faces. It just never occurred to me. And then the words that came out of my mouth almost unconsciously were, I'm not the only Black person in the room. Like, I'm the first. And that sentence itself, that thought, just so beautifully demonstrated how you can have exactly the same like factual circumstances of being, okay, in this case, 2 Black women in a room. Well, there must have been 150 people in that room. I don't know, hundreds of people in that room. So just 2 of us. So technically, yes, the only Black people in the room, but like one person think, oh, this is awful. Why is it always like this? And it be debilitating and leave them feeling excluded and in the shadows. And for another person to think of that exact same circumstance, I am like valuable in this room. I bring something to this room that other people don't think in this room. I'm gonna, I feel like I belong in this room because this room needs people like me, right? So a completely different way of thinking about yourself. So out of that experience, and when I said germinating, I think actually the culmination of a lifelong of my whole life experience of being that only Black person in the room, and how I have interpreted that and taken the value of that experience with me and succeeded in spite of that, like all came together kind of in that moment or around that moment of thinking, this is the thing. This is what is so powerful. This is why I've been able to succeed the way I have. And crucially, because around the same time I was asked to speak on a panel around being your authentic self in the workplace, particularly for Black lawyers. And I remember like people in the audience speaking about how powerless they felt and how the system was this and you couldn't do X, Y, Z, and how I can't be who I can't see. And the energy in the room, the powerlessness in the room, I remember just like really, that was the moment when I decided to write the book, because I thought, here I am with this belief in this message, be the first. Here I am with this way of looking at myself in the world that has served me so well and is why I believe that any goal is possible for me and I will always achieve, even in an environment where it looks like or seems like I don't belong. Like, people need to hear this. And that's why it went from being a very personal way of looking at myself to being a call to action and a way and the value that I now bring to Black lawyers specifically.
It's such a simple concept, but it's so powerful, and I completely see it in the context of your tribe and the people that you serve. But I think it's so important for so many people that, you know, feel marginalized for whatever reason. That idea that suddenly, in shifting that mindset, you have agency. And you're suddenly, you know, you've got your hands on the reins and you're able to take action, which is so powerful. If someone's listening to this podcast and they're dealing with that sort of sense of imposter syndrome, what's the first thing that you would, obviously contact you is the first thing that they should do, but if they're not going to do that, what's the first thing that you would recommend, you know, people do or think about in order to shift that mindset?
Yeah. I want to say it's something quite practical, even though it's to shift the mindset. And that is, well, there's two parts to it. Sorry. I need two parts to this answer. One of them is a very, if you'll allow me, is a very practical one of like, okay, like understanding how it's showing up for you. Okay. And what I mean by that is almost taking it out of the mind and the thinking piece and just starting to get to know practically that it's something like, what is it? How is that showing up in your real life? So for example, and I have, for anyone who does want this, on my website, you can download a guide. It does say for lawyers, like a guide to imposter syndrome, like the secret signs. But actually, if you can look at and identify, and this is great because it's like a checklist, identify exactly how your imposter syndrome shows up. So for example, it makes me want to check my work 5 times instead of just checking it twice to make sure it makes sense, right? Or it makes me second guess myself whenever I say something in a meeting. Then I come away and I question what I said and I'm still beating myself up 2 days later. So there's a really practical thing you can do to just understand that there's certain things that you're doing that just come from a way of thinking about yourself. And the reason why that's useful is because what I've seen, Dominic, is, and I think because imposter syndrome is one of those things that's quite fluid, a lot of people spending time going, have I got imposter syndrome? Is it really? Or is it self-doubt? And I haven't. And so we're often stuck in the problem of it at a kind of too much of a thinking level. And that can often stop us moving forward to then solve for it, which is why I try to get people to think, okay, well, how is it showing up? And that's also really empowering to know that it's just that there are lots of things that they may be doing in the workplace that's just a result of how they're thinking about themselves, which is what imposter syndrome is, a way of thinking about yourself. So that's one thing. And then at the mindset level, it is simply the practice of noticing when you're thinking, I'm the only one in the room, or when you're thinking or feeling like the victim, noticing that you're doing that, and then redirecting your brain to thinking, I'm not the only one, I'm the first. And I say redirecting your brain. And actually, you could even if you didn't do any of the practical stuff, this bit here is what will start to change if you're willing to just practice and do it repeatedly until you've internalized it. A lot of people find it surprising or would almost question the thought that, well, I can't just change how I think. Like, I hear that a lot. And I'm like, Yes, you can. You actually can do that. And it's not about lying to yourself and pretending you think something you don't. It's about learning to think differently. And you can do that. I literally have, thoughts that I know will serve me really well, serve me better. I put them on Post-it notes. I'm the first on a poster on my wall. I see it every day, right? So so if you do one thing, notice when you're in I'm the only one energy, and take yourself to I'm the first energy. And the way you do that is by practicing the thought I'm the first, trying it on. How does it feel?
Caroline, I could chat all day about this. It's fascinating and so important. I've got a final question for you. If you were to go back and give your younger self, either the 6-year-old going into school for the first time or the young woman walking into Cambridge, a piece of advice, what would that piece of advice be?
I wouldn't give myself advice, which is, I know, a strange way to answer that question. And the reason is because I think to my younger self and what the journey I went through and what I did, and I'm just in awe of the decisions I made and the determination I showed. And I don't, of course, with hindsight, there are things I could say like, it's all going to turn out great and keep going and all of that stuff. But actually, I think you were amazing. Like, genuinely, when I think about the challenges I faced and I had to overcome, I'm in awe. And you know exactly what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep doing what's working.
Amazing. Caroline, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. Thanks for listening to the Why Life's a Pitch podcast. If you'd like to improve the way you pitch and communicate, I'm giving away a special gift to all my listeners. We've developed the Pitching with Impact scorecard to help you benchmark your pitch performance in 6 key areas. It'll take you less than 5 minutes to complete, and you'll receive a detailed, personalised report packed full of insights and ideas to help you improve and grow. Just head over to dominiccolenso.com/scorecard to get started.